Patriarchy builds parking lots. Patriarchy builds shopping malls and everything matriarchy does not. Patriarchy drops bombs on Palestine and builds prisons instead of schools on Turtle Island. Patriarchy kills mamas while we hold our babies. Patriarchy shoots children, and when we fight back, shoots us and calls us crazy. Patriarchy is violent, but matriarchy is a sacred, healing mama trident. Matriarchy weaves palabras and quilts, prayer smoke and warming gifts, free of guilt. Matriarchy lifts up love into sky spirit, calling down Grandmother Moon and Mama Oshun. Matriarchy begins with the womb, offering life always, even in the face of violent, brutal strife. Matriarchy protects water and ancestors and air. Matriarchy threads liberation into our hair. No colonizers, you can't define our histories. We are right here. We will continue to come with unending prayer. You can't stop the mamas, the grandmamas, the babies, the uncles and the fathers, the liberation mamas and the land back sons and daughters. West Berkeley's Shellmound is free. MamaEarth, the Shellmound, is not for sale in perpetuity. Steam rises from the broken concrete. Capitalism buzzes in the distance. A train roars its approach. But here, in a parking lot on 4th Street in West Berkeley, as the colonizers call it, it is so quiet. Only the murmur of a wind. And then if you listen very carefully, you hear it. A 5,700-year-old whisper. It swirls above the asphalt and the painted lines of metal and rubber and plastic. Sacred shell mounds buried deep below click together in unison. If you listen carefully, you hear the ancestors. They whisper together until it becomes a song. Land back, Shellmound. This PoemCast from a PovertySkola goes out to all my colonized sons, mamas, uncles, and daughters. All of us who've been taught that MamaEarth is only to be sold and bought. To recognize, to lift up that this can happen in our time. This can happen in our time. But not without the radical redistribution of folks with stolen and hoarded wealth. Not without the powerful movements of First Nations leadership who never believed that MamaEarth was for sale. This houseless, half-colonizer daughter of a disabled Indigenous houseless mama and all of our youth, adults, and elders at Homefulness Poor Magazine and Decolonize Academy had the blessing of standing with Karina Gould, the tribal chair of the Confederated Villages of Leshon, and her beautiful family and all the warriors who have fought, prayed, called up, showed out, and marched for this precious moment of resistance to be manifested. But last week, in an act of liberation, in an act of radical redistribution and reparations, some wealth hoarders consciously redistributed over 20 million blood-stained dollars that the colonizers and the greed-fueled realist snakes had deemed was the price of a parking lot in a seafood restaurant that covered a 5,700-year-old sacred site known as the West Berkeley Shellmound, renamed to Leshon land. It is important to recognize that Karina and all of us have been fighting for something that should have already happened. We have been praying and fighting and marching for something that is repair and return and return and repair, because something has been deeply broken. A centuries-old sacred burial ground which should have been revered and protected, loved and honored by all people, not just the descendants of the ancestors there. Just like cemeteries and mortuaries are. Instead, this parking lot was not an accident, not a mistake or an error in planning, but it was violent colonization and a trajectory of other violent colonization that deems indigenous bodies inhuman and therefore not deserving of life, land, or respect, much less burial grounds, sacred spaces, or lands of origin. An 89-year-old Ruth, Orta, Ohlone Mama, and Grandmama looked up in the sky and told this poverty scholar, I am so thrilled I get to see this in my lifetime. So I ask you, conscious listeners, imagine the cemetery where your family is buried being turned into a parking lot. Imagine the desecration and the anger and the rage you would feel. As the warriors stood at this historical press conference, the ancestors rose up, quietly, steadfastly, and stood with us, circled around the allies and accomplices who made this possible. Stood with Deja Gould and Cheyenne Zapata, stood with little Anaya and Shane and Kai and Amne and all the next 7 generations who stood on this small part of Mama Earth that is no longer going to be bought or sold, pimped or played, that is no longer going to be erased, that is no longer going to be desecrated. This moment is also about the resistance moves of the Katali Foundation, who creates a sacred vessel for the wealth hoarders who redistribute, for the radical redistributors, as we teach at People School, that their immense wealth does not belong to them, but is stolen, made, if you will, on the broken backs of Black and brown, indigenous and poor people. And that this capitalist system is built for extraction, and the only solution is what I'm calling logical redistribution of all the stolen land and resources. But any of the confused settlers, and I say this with love, this is a calling in, not a calling out, who might be listening, who might be tension rising in your chest. What does this mean? Do I have to give back my home? No. Land back does not mean remaking the same settler violence that was perpetrated on First Peoples of scarcity and removal and incarceration and death. Actually, it's a coming back and a returning to the recognition that all of us are stewards of the land, and that Mama Earth is not and has never been for sale. So please, loving settlers, as I often say, let this be an example. Let us all learn more and live into more radical return, logical redistribution, and most of all, love for Mama Earth and all of us, so we can all be okay. From Palestine to America, KK. Oh, Mateo, love you all so much.